I really debated about what I wanted to talk about here this evening. I debated on it all week, and even this afternoon, I just really debated with myself, went back and forth. Do I really want to talk about this? And about 20 after 4, I decided, I need to go ahead and do this. I think it is important for us. And so hopefully you will see the importance of what we are talking about here tonight. And everything is going to come directly from the Bible. But we know that we begin our mission work here on Thursday. And the idea or the thought that I wanted to get across here tonight is that it is important that we do this. It is important that we take the gospel to other places in the world. Now, I want you to play the part of missionary here for just a minute. And I'll play the part of someone who is skeptical about what might go on or what the importance of this is. And if I came to you and I asked you the question, why is it important that we share the gospel with all of the world, how would you answer that question? What would you say to that brother? How would you answer? Okay, John says go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, Sister Jen. Okay, that's what you was going to say. And really, that is the biblical answer to that question. Now, you might think, well, nobody's ever asked that, but the fact of the matter is, yes, they have asked that. And the answer to it, why is it so important that we just go and share the gospel in other places? And we're not just talking about South America, but other places. There's mission trips to China. There's all kind of mission work that goes on in India. There's mission work. As I was growing up, we supported a missionary in France. There's some going on in Russia, and say that again. Work in Germany. There's different places that the gospel is being taught. And it is important that we do that because we are complying with what John just said just a moment ago.
I think here too, people are bombarded with it a lot more than they are in other places, and those people deserve the opportunity to get here.
Okay, exactly right. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit here towards the end of our comments. But the reason that it is important that we go and we do this is that we have a mission. Now, this question might seem silly. John's already answered it, but what is our mission? Okay, to go preach the good news, to preach the gospel. Okay, to seek and to save the lost. Where can we find that mission spelled out for us? Where can we find it? Where is it? Is it spelled out for us? Yeah, John's saying, it is spelled out for us.
You talking about Mark?
Yeah. We can also talk about Matthew too. But let's turn to Mark chapter 16. Here is our mission. The mission of the church when it comes to the gospel. In Mark chapter 16, notice what we're told in verse 15 of this passage. Okay, and notice that everything that we're going to talk about here tonight, all of these things come directly from the Bible. And so this is really, what does the Bible have to say about the idea of mission work? What does the Bible have to say? Well, in Mark chapter 16, notice what we are told in verse 15. And he said unto them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Now, I'm reading from the New King James Version of the Bible. But Jesus said, first of all, go into all the what?
World.
Okay, go into all the world. Now, what is meant here? What is meant here by that term world? What is meant here?
Everywhere.
Okay, everywhere?
There are people outside that believe, people not Christians.
Okay,
It don't have to be all over, it could be down in Marietta. There's
Okay.
people in the world down in
okay.
Marietta.
All right, Louis, you're certainly on the right track. The word world comes from the Greek word cosmos. You ever heard of the cosmos? Well, it comes from the Greek word cosmos. And cosmos carries with it the idea of the inhabitants of the earth. Two definitions I want to share with you. Number one is the inhabitants of the earth. And number two, cosmos also means the human family. And so so Christ here is saying, go into all the cosmos, go into all the inhabitants of the earth. The inhabitants of the earth. What is an inhabitant? Okay, someone who dwells there. What'd you say, Janet?
Lives there.
Okay, someone who lives there. You look that word up in the dictionary, and it defines an inhabitant as a permanent resident of a place. Okay, so what place are we talking about in verse 15? Everywhere, or the world. And so Jesus here is saying, go unto all the permanent residents of the world. Now, would that include all of those countries that we mentioned just a little bit ago?
No, because there was nobody there yet, that we know of.
Well, would that include it today?
Yes.
Yes, it would include it today. They are a permanent resident just like you and I are permanent residents. Okay? The indigenous people of South America, does that include them?
Yes.
It certainly does. And so Jesus is saying, go unto all the permanent residents of the world. Now let's talk about that second definition. And if you don't remember, the second definition for cosmos is the human family. Now, what is a family? What is a family?
We discussed that this morning.
As far as the biological definition is the genus and species, it's of a certain family.
Okay.
That would include Homo sapiens, which is us.
Okay, that would include Homo sapiens, which is us. What is a family? Well, a family is a group that has a common what? Characteristic? Ancestry. Has a common ancestry, or let's just get back to the very beginning, has a common ancestor. Every family here tonight all began with a common ancestor, right? You know, my children, Joshua, Andrew, Nicholas, and Sarah, they all come from a common ancestor. And really, I got to thinking about this, and you know what? It just doesn't really start at me. It goes back as far as my father, and then I thought, no, it goes back as far as George Tucker, and then it goes far back as far as the Tucker before that. You can trace it all the way back to a single Tucker who started this family. Now, we're talking about the world, right? Does everyone in the world have a common ancestor?
Yes.
Who is it?
No. Adam and Eve.
God is the common ancestor. Yes, Noah. Yes, Adam and Eve. But remember, we got to go all the way back to where it started. And so that common ancestor would be God. And God, to you and I, is what? What is it?
Our Father.
He is our Father. C. Starts with a C. Creator. He is our Creator. What did He create? Everything. Turn to Acts chapter 14. Now, we're going to come back here to Mark. And so if you want to put your pencil there or whatever. But let's go to Acts chapter 14. Acts chapter 14. And let's notice what we are told in verse 15. And so Acts 14 and 15. Okay, now once again, this is the New King James Version of the Bible. Okay, everybody there? All right. And saying, men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these useless things to the living God. Who did what?
Made heaven and earth
Who made heaven and the earth,
and everything.
who made the sea, and all things that are in the sea. All right, so he made the heaven, he made the earth, and he made the sea. And we're told he made all things therein. Meaning what? Okay, everything in heaven, he made it. Everything in the sea, all the fish, all the mammals, he created them. And what about on the earth?
All the animals,
All the animals, but also
Adam and Eve.
you and I. Okay, you and I.
I often think of this, these are the smartest guys around, and they're wasting their time worshiping something useless.
Okay, exactly right. Worshiping something useless. Turn to the living God. He made heaven, earth, seas, and all things therein. And so God created the earth. He created you and I. He is the creator of every inhabitant or every permanent residence of the earth. He is our common ancestor. And so we are all a part of the same family. And what did Jesus say? Jesus said, go into all the what? World. Go into all the cosmos. Go into all the permanent residents. Go into all the human family. And do what?
Preach the gospel.
And preach the gospel. So you go back to Mark. Mark chapter 16, verse 15. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. And preach the gospel. Notice the last part of the verse. The last part of verse 15. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to who?
Created.
To every creature. Exactly right. To every creature. Now, let's add on to what we've been saying. What is meant here by the word every? All. It comes from the Greek word pas, which means all or every, and it also means every one. Every one.
In fact, some translations use everyone.
And some translations use everyone. And so go and preach the gospel to every one of God's what? Creatures. Okay, now, what is meant here by creatures?
I think of creatures as squirrels and chipmunks and little creepy creatures.
Okay,
I don't think that's what they're meaning here.
that's not what is being meant here. In fact, the word creature here in the Greek means creation. And so go and preach the gospel to every one of God's creations. Not everything that God created. If it said everything, then what would that indicate to us?
Everything.
Trees.
Yeah, we need to go preach the gospel to the trees. We need to go preach the gospel to the animals. But didn't say that. Every one of God's creations. Acts 14 and 15. God created all things, including you and I. Okay. But to who is Jesus speaking here?
It's the apostles.
Okay. His apostles? All right. To who is he speaking? Well, go up one verse. Go up one verse. To verse 14. Later he appeared to the who?
11.
Appeared to the 11. As they sat at the table, and he rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. And he said unto them. Them is referring to who? To the 11. Okay. Well, the 11 what?
The 11 apostles.
Okay, so we've got one answer apostles, one answer disciple. Which is correct? An apostle was a disciple.
Yeah, specifically the apostles.
Okay. Now, let's turn to Matthew 28. To Matthew 28. All right, now we're asking the question, the 11 who? Matthew 28 answers that question for us. The 11 who? Now, beginning in verse 18. Matthew 28 and 18. And Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, okay, now who's them? Well, okay, the 11, let's go to verse 16. Okay, so Mark 16 said the 11. Well, let's see if Matthew can help us out in it. In verse 16, we are told, then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee to the mountain in which Jesus had appointed for them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and in earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Okay, so he is speaking unto the 11 what?
The disciples.
Disciples.
Which are the apostles?
Which are the apostles. But what is meant by a disciple?
Follower.
It means a pupil, a learner, or a follower of Christ. How many followers of Christ do we have here tonight?
Our many here.
Every single one of us are followers of Christ. So does that mean we are a disciple?
Yes.
It certainly does. And so Jesus, in speaking to his disciples then, is also speaking unto his disciples now. And
I don't actually follow that thinking here.
you don't follow that thinking?
I think after the general term of disciples, he was speaking to the apostles with a specific command, which the apostles then passed down to other scriptures that would lead us into this.
That would lead us into this. Okay.
That this isn't specifically, this is specifically to the apostles, but then the apostles in turn, the action that we see them teaching later, as well as what other Christians did, sees that they taught that same principle back out.
Okay. And so they did this very thing, and they passed that on to other disciples, and it comes down even to us today. And so what are we to do?
Even when you get down to verse 20, he says, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you.
What I've commanded
So
you.
teach
Exactly
them
right.
to observe what I've commanded you.
See, if
Exactly
this
right.
had been specifically given to us, every one of us would have to go to the whole world. The
Wow.
apostles did,
Yeah.
but we see that the apostles broke it down and gave each, like Timothy, who was a preacher, was given more specific instructions what to do with that.
Okay.
Than what some of the other were, but we also know when the persecution come upon the church, that everybody that went carried that with them. So there's
Okay.
multiple ways with different layers of responsibility, as I would understand.
Okay. And we're going to talk about world some more. Okay. Because many times we do have a misconception, and we think that the world means out there sometime, somewhere. And so what was the disciples told here to do? Okay. Well, in Matthew chapter 28, what are they told to do? Go and make disciples of what? All nations. Okay. All, once again, comes from pos, which means everything, all, every, or everyone. We have here the phrase nations, where in Mark chapter 16 we have going to all the world. Now, world comes from, you remember the Greek word? Cosmos. Nations doesn't come from cosmos, but rather nations comes from the Greek word ethnos, which means a tribe, it means a nation, but it also means the human family. The human family. Okay, now that leads us back in to talking about who and what makes up the human family. Who and what makes up the human family? When we talk about going to all the world, many times we think about what?
Everywhere except here.
Okay, Chuck? Okay, the physical world. We think about everything out there, right? And John, what'd you say?
Say everywhere but here.
Okay, we think about everywhere but here. Okay, now let's talk about the idea of ethnos and cosmos, both of which means the human family. Is our neighbor still a part of the human family?
Yes.
Okay, meaning the person who actually lives next to us. The human family. Okay, is our son or our daughter or our aunt and our uncle a part of the human family? Yes. And so it's not just out there, but it is also everybody in here. Everybody in here. All right. So, can we fulfill this mission by sharing the gospel with everybody here?
Yes.
Can we fulfill the mission by sharing the gospel with everybody there? Can we fulfill the mission by sharing the gospel with both here and there? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, as Paul told Timothy, he was to teach other men who could carry that message on. So we're teaching the world, even me, if I'm not there, if I've taught someone else who ends up there, whether that's the 20th guy down the road, it's still talk to the whole, talk to the world.
Talk to the world. Exactly
We've got
right.
to help fund that mission.
Yeah. Okay, so I actually had someone who once told me, this was several years ago and it certainly wasn't here. And the thing that I really remember about this is a brother in Christ, and he come up and he was pointing his finger at me. And just, doesn't that irritate you? And he said, what you do over there, you need to be doing right here. Okay, not all the time. Pointing. And yeah, brother, that's true. What we're doing over there, we can do over here. And he said, no, you don't understand. I'm not talking about we, I'm talking about you.
Well, you're the preacher, that's your job, get it done.
Oh, he said that very thing. That is what we pay you to do. Okay. When we are told to go into all the world, was it limited to just certain people? Just the elders? To preacher? To deacons?
It's to anybody who reads this and believes it.
Okay. Anybody who reads it and believes it. And so, not only is this something we can do out there, but it's also something that we can do in here. And the very thing that we do over there is now the very thing that we're doing here. And so we're meeting that mission by doing both, here and there. We're meeting that mission.
And, and what he said, I agree with what that person said, that he is not thinking the right way with what he had.
Exactly right. Exactly
It is the job of the preacher. It is the job of the elder. It is the job, but it's also the individual job as well.
Right. Exactly right.
Well, you see, the 7 possibly deacons have had it started. One of them got stoned for preaching besides being there. The other one, Philip, went to the eunuch.
Philip went to the eunuch. Philip also went to Samaria.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we also see that they're primary to take care of the physical needs, so the ones who were better teachers could do their job.
Could do their job.
So God has built support and support.
Right.
Everybody's not Paul, but someone can take care of these guys that's having problems, so that Paul doesn't have to deal with it, and he can do what he does.
But he
Okay.
also that said, teach them all the things that I've commanded you. So somebody has to take care of that too. And you can't be everywhere.
You can't be everywhere. Okay?
There's all kinds of different jobs. people.
That's why.
Go ahead.
You're teaching us here, so we can go there.
So you can go there. Okay, so we can go out here. Not necessarily go there
Right.
as in a foreign land. You want to go to a foreign land, come see me, I'll take you. Okay?
Yeah, they got big snakes.
I'll take you on a cruise. Okay?
On that little John boat on the Berbice River, like, you know.
Go ahead.
That fellow came to you and said those things is what many people feel, because we hired a preacher to do that teaching for us, we don't have to do anything.
That we don't have to do anything.
And
Yeah.
that comes nowhere out of God's word.
Exactly right. And isn't that a mistaken idea? Okay, if the preacher is doing it, if Tom is doing it, then it's going to get taken care of. I don't have to do anything. You know, Chuck said something about that this morning.
Well,
You know.
The thing is leading people to do things because they want to, not because they have to, okay?
Yeah.
And North End's taking on a program now, where they're having a system where it includes most people in the congregation, but everybody doing something. Some people are babysitting, but so other people can go out, but everybody doing something to be involved in the work.
Okay. Now, Chuck just a little bit ago said not every one of us can be a Paul. Okay, now does that remind you of anything? It should remind you of a lesson we had 2 weeks ago. Not everybody can be Paul, not everybody can be Peter,
Be Andrew.
but we can all be Andrews. What was Andrew known for? Bringing people to Christ. Yeah. The best example is there in John chapter 1, is the best example of Andrew going and bringing someone to Jesus. There in John chapter 1, notice what we are told in verses 41 and 42. Now this is after he has spent some time with the rabbi. He spent some time with Christ, who he called Rabbi. Rabbi means what? Exactly right. Teacher. Exactly right. And so before they spent some time with Christ, they called him teacher. But then they spent some time with him, and at the end of that time, notice the change that took place in Andrew. Verse 41. And he first found his own brother. He is Andrew in verse 40. And he first found his own brother Simon and said to him, we have found the what? Messiah. It is no longer rabbi or teacher. It is now Messiah. What's he telling Andrew here? Or what's he telling Peter? Excuse me. We have found who? We have found Christ, Messiah, Messios. Messios means the anointed. Okay, who's he been anointed by? Be anointed by God. Okay, so we have found the Christ, we have found the Messiah, which is interpreted Christ. What does Christ mean? Christus, Son of God. So he has gone from we have found a great teacher to we have found the Son of God. And then what did he do in verse 42?
He took Simon
He took Simon
to Jesus.
to Jesus. Why did he take him to Jesus? So Jesus can do what? Teaching. The exact same thing that he had done to Andrew and I believe John. He had taught them, and so now he brings Peter unto Christ so that Christ can teach him. You know, one of the beautiful things about taking the gospel to other places is that others can become a lot like Andrew and bring people.
You can see the next few verses down through there show how that compound, one brought this one, and he went and found this one, and pretty soon they brought the group.
Yep. He brought more and more and more to Christ. For many years now, For many years, when we have shown up in South America, when we have shown up in Guyana, for many years, when we make our presence known, and we're just walking through one of the villages, we have had members of the church come up and say, Brother Bob, Brother Tom, Brother Mikey, I've been talking to so-and-so about the church. I've been talking to them about Christ. They would like to learn more. Can you come and teach them? That's being Andrew. And, of course, we're more than happy to do that. Now, in the last couple of years, we've changed that a little bit, and Mikey now gathers all of this before we get there. And come Thursday night, Friday, he'll share with us, tell us who we need to go and see. By the way, this might interest you. Just the other day, Brother Clint was talking to us. Now, Sarah Marie, Clint's wife, takes care of our website. Now, Chuck, I think you were in on this conversation, so correct me if I'm wrong. You have no idea what I'm talking? Okay. But when we put a video onto the website, we go through a little thing called YouTube, okay? And so when we put a sermon on our website, it also goes onto YouTube. You go to YouTube and you type in Lower Paw Church of Christ, it will bring up 2 or 3 pages of all of these lessons. Now, YouTube gets in contact with Sarah Marie, who started all of this, and she let us know through Clint just the other day that our videos have been viewed by over 1,000 people. Was that your understanding?
I wasn't that part of it. I didn't get that far with it.
Okay. By over 1,000 people. And guess where most of them come from? South America.
Really?
South America. The majority of them are coming from South America. Now, that really, well, every once in a while I take from YouTube one of the lessons and I put it on Facebook. Okay, and I think what is happening is Mikey sees this, and then he goes and he tells some of the brethren, well, Brother Tom had a great lesson on Facebook. You need to go and watch it. He'll give them the address. And so they go and they look at it, and so they pass it on to the next person, and before you know, it's almost 1,000 people watching our lessons on Facebook and YouTube and our website. And so it is having an effect. And I told Gina and I told Bob, I says, it'll be interesting to see if that bears fruit when we get down there. Be interesting to see that. But they are being like Andrew, and they're bringing people. You know, another reason I think it is important for us to continue to share the gospel, not just in South America but around here, is that we've got to go where Jesus talks about the fields being white unto the harvest. A couple chapters later, in John chapter 4. In John chapter 4, notice what we're told. For the sake of time, let's not read as many verses as I was going to. And let's start in verse 33. John chapter 4, beginning in verse 33. Therefore the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him anything to eat? And Jesus said unto them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me, and to finish his work. Verse 35. Do you not say, there are still 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white unto the harvest. All right. Let's ask our resident expert, which would be Joe. Why is everybody looking around? Who's going to be? Let's ask our resident expert. What do you think is meant here by already white for the harvest? What do you think is meant?
Lots of people
There's lots of people to bring in.
Starving for the word.
Okay, they're starving for the word. All right, now, John, you plant a garden. You plant a garden. How often do you harvest out of that garden? Okay, when they're ripe. So you can maybe get what? How many harvests?
Well, numerous times.
Numerous times. Numerous times.
Different things are ripe at different times.
They're ripe at different times, but only during a certain period of the year, right? Unless you're growing something inside, are you going to have ripe tomatoes unless you're growing them inside? If you plant tomatoes in December, January, February, you're going to have ripe tomatoes? No, because there's only a period of time that you can plant and harvest that crop. Are we talking physical crop here or spiritual crop? Spiritual crop. Spiritual crop. And so Jesus here is saying that the spiritual harvest is always ready. So where is it better to go with the gospel? Some place that is going to be standoffish, or some place where they're already white to the harvest, ready to hear the gospel?
You want somebody ready to hear, because if they're not ready to hear, they're just gonna send you on your merry way, they don't wanna hear it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you just made me think of something, that harvest thing, different parts of the world, harvest times are different times. So we can go to that part of the world where it's ready to be harvested and be a benefit, where we try to harvest something over here in the middle of the winter time, all we're doing is wasting our time and effort, where we can go someplace where it has benefit.
Exactly right. Guess how many harvests you can have in South America? You can have harvests year round. Year round. That's not always the case here. But that is also true spiritually. There are many places of the world that are starving. They want to hear the gospel. They need to hear the gospel. China is one. People are wanting to hear the gospel. India is another. People are wanting to hear the gospel. South America, isn't it? People are wanting to hear the gospel. And so those are the places that we should go. Can't give up around here. We're having quite a bit of success. But with that success comes what? With success comes what?
Hard work.
Hard work. And also with success there comes failure. Right? If you listen to what Dave had to say this morning in his comments during the business meeting, he talked about the addresses that we get. You got how many the last time?
Well, we're getting about 50% of them that are actually true addresses.
Okay, about 50% of them are actually true addresses. So out of the addresses that we're getting, 50% of them are not true.
Right.
Out of those 50% that are true, how many studies have you set up?
50% of the ones that are true.
Okay.
Start Bible correspondence.
Yes. All right. So out of the 50% that are true, how many studies have we got from that? Or Bible correspondence course
We
from
have
that?
11 out of 20.
11 out of 20. So that tells us
I think that's actually very good.
that's very good.
Extremely high.
That's very good. That is extremely high. If it's 11 out of 20, that still tells us there's 8, right? No, 9 out of 20
Unless you got West Virginia,
that doesn't want to hear the gospel, huh?
unless you're figuring on West Virginia map.
That's I'm figuring on West Virginia,
And
man.
not all those that start will complete, okay? But
Exactly
At
right.
least they want to start, so you go
Right.
from there.
But you need to go where the harvest is plenteous, where people want to hear. And so it's important that we continue to do this important work. And I'm sure that there's a lot of other things. I go back in my notes here. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that I wanted to talk about, but we're out of time now. And so we want to extend the invitation. If we have anyone here this evening who needs to come in obedience to the gospel, why not do so? Why together we stand and we sing.